Well, good morning and welcome to today's video here at Concordia Technology Solutions. My name is Peter Frank. I am the manager of our group here at CTS, and I'm happy that you could join us again for another one of our weekly videos about topics that allow you to leverage technology in your ministry. So today we are going to be talking about this idea of having multiple cameras in worship. And my experience with this is rather limited. I have some experience from about 20 years ago at my home congregation, back when we used to record things on VHSs and share them with shut-ins. And we had a ridiculously fancy setup at that time because of a member in our congregation who did that for a living. And so I got to do the whole video work. And then I kind of went dark on that for about 20 years until we started doing videos here at CTS. So I am not the one qualified to talk to you about this today, and that's why we have our special guest. So I'd like to introduce my friend and former colleague, Andrew Osborne. Andrew is the Director of Worship Arts at Cornerstone Lutheran Church in Fishers, Indiana. Andrew, how are you doing today?
Doing good. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for joining me, and this is I think second time in the last month or so that you've been on here. It's good to have you back and
right.
sharing your insight.
Good to be here.
All right, so you have a little bit of a unique background when it comes to both media and ministry that really lets you be the one more qualified than me to talk about this. A lot of people are more qualified than me to talk about this, but you have this unique background that really makes this your niche. So tell us a little bit about what you've done in the past and kind of what's brought you to your role today.
Yeah. So I went to college at Concordia University in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I was going for family life ministry, which is youth ministry. But as I was there, I started getting into doing film with some friends just for fun. And we decided, well, if we're going to do this, let's do it for real. So we went to the community college for about a year and took some film classes there. And then I realized there's not a lot of film jobs in Michigan if I really wanted to do that. And I really knew that I wanted to do ministry of some kind still. So I went back to Concordia and finished out with a religious studies degree, but I still really enjoyed doing film, and I got involved in a local church in Ann Arbor, and helped out doing some video stuff and youth ministry stuff there, and that kind of became a job eventually, doing both. So I was doing ministry and doing video at the same time, and they didn't. In the past, that church had a large, expensive video system, but it was beta, which is obsolete now and didn't work and was standard definition. So part of my job was to replace all that in a cost-effective way. So I was tasked with trying to put together a multi-camera video system for that church.
All right, fantastic. All right, so the topic for today is based on a blog post that you recently wrote for us, and I'll get that title right, Enhancing Your Church's Video Streams with Multiple Cameras. And you can see it there on the screen. I recommend that our viewers take a look and read this post if this is a topic of interest for you, because there's a lot of great details, and we're going to be going through some of that today. So let's start off with this idea of why. For people like me, even though I've used multiple cameras before, I certainly did not participate in the setup at all. And as we do our live videos here, I find that one camera is difficult enough to get set up and running and streaming online or even for recording. So why go with more than one? What would your recommendation be on the value of multiple cameras?
The reason I like it better than just one camera is there's a lot going on in a worship service. And so when you only have one camera, you're either stuck just looking at one section of the sanctuary, and the action may not be in that section anymore if the pastor's moving around, or if there's special music or something like that, you may not be able to see it, or you're going to be moving the camera around a lot if you're using one camera. Whereas if you have multiple cameras and can switch between them, you're able to more effectively capture everything that's happening. And to me, that's important because we have a lot of members in our congregation who aren't able to attend every week, whether it's for medical purposes or they're shut-ins or whatever it is. And so we have a lot of people that view our service online, and we want them to feel really connected to the service still, even though they can't be there. And with one camera, you can't really get that same effect. You know you can only see what you see, and the camera can be shaky if it's moving around too much. Whereas if you have multiple cameras, it can kind of bring you into the action and make you feel like you're part of it again.
Great. Now, how do you go about explaining that to church leadership when finances are tight? When you're just struggling to get by, as many churches are today, and then you bring up this idea in investing in equipment and multiple cameras and everything that goes along with that. What's your recommendation to our viewers for how to broach this subject?
To be honest, I don't know if you necessarily have to. If you can't afford it, stick with one camera and it'll be good. It just won't be that great next level to really make people feel like they're in the sanctuary with you. But again, if you can't afford it, then don't try and piece it together and stretch your budget too thin where you can't actually do ministry, because that's the more important piece of this. This is just to enhance what you are already doing.
Great. So let's talk budget a little bit. If there is some flexibility, and often donors who are seeking to expand ministry opportunities will give for specific purposes just like that. What is the budget that you might be talking about, the range? And I know we're going to get into like small budget and high budget, but what are we looking at from a range of pricing here that you might want to be expecting even at the low end?
Yeah. Well, for the low end of things, I would think to get started well and have some cameras that are worth even purchasing, you should expect to spend probably close to $3,000 to start with. That'll get you 3 good cameras and the software you need and things like that. Again, there's tons of options out there, so you could find stuff that's cheaper and that works just as well, but that's probably a good range, somewhere around 3,000 to start off on.
Okay. And I'm sure going up from there, depending on how high quality you want and how many cameras. So you outline a number of key pieces of equipment that's needed for this multiple camera setup. Can you explain just in a broad concept what the equipment needed is? And then we'll get into some very specific ones that you're recommending people look at. But just that broad overview, obviously cameras, but what else?
Yeah, so like you said, cameras is the main thing. You want to make sure you get some decent cameras that are high definition, are able to zoom a decent amount, because the front of the sanctuary tends to be further away than where you have the cameras. It's hard to get a camera right in front of the altar or the pastor, wherever he might be, without blocking the view of the people in the congregation. So typically you would have the camera in the back of the sanctuary. So you need to have a decent camera that can zoom in to the pastor to actually see what he's saying. So the camera or multiple cameras is where you really need to invest a lot. But then you also need a computer that can run the software you'll need. And that software is a video switcher. And the one that we use here at our sanctuary is Telecast Wirestream. And that allows you to send the streams from the cameras to the computer, and you can mix them down, and you can bring the audio in and mix that with the cameras. You can also insert graphics and videos and images and different things like that. So it's really flexible with what you can do. And then you could send that stream from that software to Facebook Live or YouTube Live or any of those services, and you can also record it to your local hard drive. So Wirecast, your switcher / broadcast software, is another investment. That's several $100s for that. And then you need a way to capture the audio. Many churches have a soundboard or a mixer in the back of their sanctuary to already bring in the microphones. So there's ways to go from that to the computer, but you need a audio interface to get out of the board typically and into the computer and convert it to a digital signal. In our sanctuary, we use the Focusrite, I think it's the Scarlett 2i, and that takes the analog signal from our board that has all the microphones in it and converts it to a digital signal and sends it to the computer. So you need an audio interface. So camera, audio interface, switcher. Let's see, what else? I think there was one other thing I had on there.
I know one of the things we're going to talk about is the Intensity Shuttle We'll talk about that in
Yes.
more detail, but I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, so to go from the camera to the computer, most cameras don't go directly, don't output a digital stream. So it's analog coming out of the camera, and you need to convert it into a digital signal, and that's where the Blackmagic Intensity Shuttle comes in. You plug the camera into that, and then that converts a digital signal, which you then send to the computer. So it's a lot like the audio interface. It's just capturing the analog signal and converting it to a digital signal to then send to your computer.
Okay, very good. Well, let's start off digging into this small budget approach, and we'll grow from there. And we'll put the names of the products suggested on the screen as you talk about them. So if you don't mind going through these one by one, and we'll dig into that. And if our viewers have specific questions about these or other ideas of potential devices that they want to run past Andrew, you can put that in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end. But otherwise, let's dig into this idea of getting started on a smaller budget. So the first thing that you've got on here, Andrew, and we'll make you struggle through all the letters and numbers here, but the Sony device. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so this camera, I can't remember what the actual model number is. I think there it is, the HDR CX260V. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that exact camera. I just looked at the specifications for Wirecast, and that was one of their suggested cameras. And I've heard people using this one, and it's a good camera, but it's also on the lower end of the price range. So whenever you decide whatever software you decide to use, whether it's Telestream, Wirecast, or the live stream software, or anything like that, you need to make sure that you look at their specifications and find cameras that actually work well with their software, because sometimes you might get a camera and realize that it doesn't actually work with it. So that's why I suggested that camera, because it's not too high of a price. It has all the capabilities you need: high definition, has decent zoom, and it has an output from HDMI that you can then send to the Intensity Shuttle, which we'll talk about in just a second here.
Okay.
But that's why I suggested that camera.
Mainly because it's a good quality, but still on the lower end for those smaller budgets. So
Correct.
tell us about this Wirecast Studio. So we're using the live stream studio, which works well for us, but you're suggesting Wirecast, or Telestream's Wirecast. Tell us about that a little bit.
I think they're very similar softwares. I haven't got to dig into to live stream as much as I had to get into Wirecast since I got here. But from what I could tell, they're very similar, and they do a lot of the same things. I wouldn't be able to say exactly where they differ, but they do the same things, like mixing in graphics, like you have at the bottom right here. You can mix that in through the software. You can mix different cameras together, so it sends a feed from each camera individually into the software, and you can switch between those cameras and fade between them. You bring in the audio to the software and mix that in. You can bring in videos if you want to send a video to your live stream, or show examples from different things you're doing. You can mix those in. I know before we've done a conference where we had a speaker who couldn't be there, and couldn't be there live, but they pre-recorded what they were going to say, and we were able to mix that into the actual session as if they were there. By using this kind of software, you can mix that media in.
So by setting yourself up for this kind of setup, you're not even limiting yourself to just the two cameras or the multiple cameras.
Right.
You're really positioning yourself to do many other forms of media as well.
Absolutely.
That's cool. That's something I didn't even think about as you get into this, that, focus just on the multiple camera setup, but it really does set you into even better media or different media from there. So good.
Right.
All right, so tell us about this next thing, the Tascam US2X2. What is that?
Yeah, so the Tascam US2X2, here at our site we use the Focusrite Scarlett 2i2. audio interface. But the Tascam, again, I looked on the Wirecast specifications, and that was one of the ones they preferred you use because it works a little better with their software. And it's similar price to what we have here. But basically all it does is it captures the audio from whatever you're sending in and sends a digital signal to your computer. So right now I have my microphone that I'm using currently sending to our audio interface, and that's converting this analog signal into a digital signal and then sending it onto the computer. So it doesn't have a ton of bells and whistles like Wirecast has, but it plays a pivotal role in your setup. Because without it, you just wouldn't have audio.
Yeah, and you can't use the Blue Yeti mics like we've got here. That doesn't work as well in a worship setting. Although it's not too bad. When we were at the worship conference in River Forest, I carried around my Yeti and placed it out to capture some organ music, and it was sufficient. We'll go with that.
Yeah.
Not a great long-term or weekly solution. So, and then the last thing on here, you have Blackmagic Intensity Shuttle. That sounds, you don't really want to bring Blackmagic into a church, do you?
Yeah, the name sounds a little weird, but it's just the name of the brand, I guess. But Blackmagic has some really high quality, yet not super expensive gear that you can use in your churches. So it's just get by the name and use the really well-produced software hardware.
And this is the thing that converts the video from analog to digital for you.
Yep. So when you get a camcorder like that Sony camcorder, you can't just go plug a wire into the camera and send it to the computer. You have to have a device in between that changes the signal from analog to digital, and that's what this little shuttle does. Is you can send HDMI to the shuttle and then out from there to USB or Thunderbolt to your computer. I think it can also accept RCA from the camera, or SDI was the other option.
Okay.
So depending on what your camera sends out, most cameras these days that are on the market send out an HDMI signal, and that's probably the easiest to use.
Okay. Very good. Well, a lot of that I would say is Greek to me, but I think I'd understand it better if it was Greek. So let's talk about expanding your budget a little bit. And you're not going to this high-end, Hollywood movie production kind of budget, but you are saying if you have a higher budget, here are some additional things or different things you can do. Talk to us a little bit about that as we get into this larger budget discussion.
It's funny you mentioned the Hollywood budget. There's a church in town here they're a mega church that they're a non-denominational mega church, and someone on our staff was just talking to me about their setup and their cameras. They wanted to have a specific look. They were going for more like a daytime soap opera, softer, warmer kind of look. So they went to a soap opera company or whoever produces those, and they asked what cameras they use, and they ended up picking up several of those, and they're $80,000 cameras.
Oh my goodness.
I know none of our churches are ever going to want to go to that level probably, so we won't even discuss that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I think if people had $80,000 to spend, they'd spend that on a second or third pastor.
You would think so.
Wow. All right, so what are you talking about here? What's in a reasonably larger budget?
Right. So our congregation, we do have a decent budget. We have a lot of people here that are give a lot, so we're very blessed. And we were able to purchase a pretty decent system. It's the Vadio, I forget the exact, there it is, RoboShot 12 QCCU system. And the Vadio cameras, they are mounted on our walls, on the back wall and then the side walls. And those cameras send a signal to the booth, and then that signal gets sent to a mixer board that we can control all three cameras from that board. And they're all super high quality professional cameras that can zoom in, they can pan and tilt and do whatever you need them to. So we can get around the sanctuary and point them wherever we need to and switch between them seamlessly without causing any problems. So they're really nice cameras to have.
Okay, so the cameras themselves need to have something added to them from a controlling standpoint, right? They don't come
Yeah.
with that built in. Talk a little bit
So
about
the
that.
sure the CCU unit, um, it has a camera controller. So this cameras send to the controller, which then you can change the iris and all the different settings on the camera from there, rather than going up to the camera and adjusting them on each camera. You can control it all from one spot, and then you send from those CCU camera controllers, or excuse me, the boxes to the camera controller, and that's the system that you can pan and tilt and switch between the cameras. It's like a professional switcher that we use, and so and to be honest, I'm still learning a lot of this stuff because I'm much more used to the
Lower
camcorder
budget.
sending exactly, where you have to have someone standing at each camera, and so this system where it's all being sent to one board that you can control is still a little foreign to me, and I'm trying to learn it as I go.
Well, that's
But it's much easier to use with one person. Like I said, at my last site, when we used the camcorders, we had to have someone standing at each one controlling it and moving it around. Excuse me. But here, everything's being sent to the controller, where you can have one person mixing it and sending the signal onto the stream. So it's much easier from a volunteer standpoint.
okay, cool. We'll get into the volunteer discussion in a minute because I think that's going to be a critical piece for many of our congregations, our church workers who are watching this. But really, those are the only two differences. You said that the switcher and the audio equipment and the capture card and all that are the same for both budgets.
Yeah. So we still have to send to the audio interface to get our audio to the Wirecast, because we send our videos signal to Wirecast. With the Vadio system, I believe you are able to send straight from that to the computer, and that does export a digital signal, I believe.
Okay.
I'd have to look into that, but I believe that's how it works. So you may not need the shuttle, but
Oh, there's
one
some
of the things
cost savings.
I wanted to mention, yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention with this system is, if you do decide to go with a higher budget system like this, you would really want to have someone from their company come out and help you kind of place out what you need and where you need it, because you are going to be investing quite a bit more. So you don't want to just try to piece this together on your own. You'll want to ask an expert who really knows the system, rather than just trying to do it on your own.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. And we're going to have an ebook coming out in the next month or so that kind of walks through that process of how do you get started with it. Not getting into the equipment as much, but that process of how do you vet out consultants and companies to
Yeah.
help you with that. So that should be
Oh,
good.
that's awesome.
Yeah, John Elmer is going to be writing that for us. He's from the Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne, and he's advised a lot of churches. So that'll be for those churches who are ready to take it to this next level or even further. So yeah, it'll be a nice tie-in with this.
Yeah, that'll be
Before-
super helpful.
yeah. Before we get into volunteer discussion, because that's where I want to head next, just a quick question about what kind of longevity you're going to get out of this. How many years would you expect a system like the smaller budget and the larger budget to last a congregation? Are they going to have to replace it every couple of years, or is it going to last 5, 10 years for them? What would you, in your expert opinion, what would you say?
That's a good question, and I haven't been around long enough to see things go out too often or too quickly. But like I said, the church I was at that had the beta cams, I think they had purchased those 15 years before I got there, and by the time I got there, they were completely obsolete. So at least 15 years, I would think things will change. And these days, things change so quickly. New technology comes out so rapidly. You'll probably need to look into it at least 5 years out, planning to upgrade things. And now I say that, but I think things should be able to keep up and give you the quality that you need for a little longer, probably. So it just depends on what your congregation's looking at, and what you're expecting out of the hardware.
Sure. So even though you're investing quite a bit, when you look at 5 years is still a long period of time for an investment like this. When many other of the expenses in the church, we talk about snow removal and what that costs on an annual basis, and that gets you one weekend. Something like this, you could be spending several hundred or maybe several $1,000s, but if you're getting even 2 years out of that, that's a better investment than a lot of what we have to pay for in the church from a facility standpoint. But
Right.
yeah, getting 5 years at a minimum is even better than that. So in your final thoughts, one of the things you mentioned in the blog post is about volunteers. Can you talk through this idea of volunteers? And it sounds like you've kind of got this weird paradox where if you have lower end equipment or a lower budget, you may have to rely on volunteers more for multiple cameras, but if you have a higher budget, you may require fewer volunteers. Is that kind of what you're saying there?
Yeah, that seems to be what I've experienced. Like I said, I've used both setups, the lower budget setup and now the higher budget setup. And the lower budget setup, you have to have multiple people running the cameras to be able to get them to move around and have the settings all sync together. Whereas with the higher budget system, you're able to sync those settings from one spot and then have someone run those cameras from one spot and mix them all together. So the more you pay, typically the more you're going to get out of it, and you're able to make it a little more simple for the one person running it.
Okay, very good. Any other challenges and advice that you would have for somebody who's looking to get into this, either at the smaller budget or the larger budget side of things?
I guess one of the things I've come across is that even if you have the volunteers who are willing to do the work for either system, you're still going to need to train them pretty regularly because videography is more of an art than you would necessarily think it is. I guess maybe for some people. But one of the challenges I've run into is we've had youth who run our cameras, which is great. They get involved and they're actively paying attention, which is nice. But sometimes it can be hard to get them to realize that when they move the camera or they use the joystick to move the camera, if they don't try to, you have to do it smoothly, otherwise it's going to jerk and it'll kind of suck the person who's watching out of it, and they realize, oh, something's going on with the camera, rather than being engaged in worship. So having regular training with your volunteers is important because not everyone's a trained videographer. So you need to kind of work with them and get their skills up to par.
So wait, are you saying that youth are not 100% reliable for something like this?
They are definitely reliable, maybe not 100%.
Gotcha. Very good.
But neither
Yeah.
are adults.
That is a good point. Yeah, like I mentioned at the beginning, this was something that I got to help with a little bit at the beginning, when I was a youth, and I didn't get too far into it. But at that point you made about paying attention, when you are filming a service, you do have to be watching it and hearing that. And so I could see that as a good way to get somebody who's maybe not entirely connected with the congregation to become connected a little bit more and hear God's word in that way. So that's another side.
I had to have some conversations with one of our youth who kept pulling out his phone during the sermon because he would be filming the pastor and all of a sudden the pastor would walk off the screen and there'd be like a minute and a half where there's no one on the screen. And so I had to say, hey, you shouldn't be on your phone.
Yeah, that's not good. Wonderful. Well, Andrew, thanks so much for joining us. And to our viewers, let me pull up and see if we've got any questions. Doesn't look like we've got it now, but you're welcome to go out to the blog post. We've got the link on there. You can ask questions on there, and Andrew will get them. And if he can give you some advice, I know he'd be more than happy to. You can also reach out to us here at CTS, and if we don't know the answer, we always find somebody. That's why we got people like Andrew to help us out. So, Andrew,
and I go to other people who are actual experts.
Hey, that's all right. We're all here to help each other. So great. Well, thanks again for joining me, Andrew. Thanks for joining me to our viewers, and please be sure to tune in with us next Thursday at the same time here on the Concordia Technology Solutions Facebook page, as we've got another great discussion for you. Thanks again. Have a great day.